All right, so my name is Natalie Lunbeck, and I work for a shipyard. I started with Shipyard 3 years ago as an intern, and just last summer after I graduated, I became a full-time employee, and I've gotten the opportunity to solve some really cool problems while working with them. And one of the main things that I've been very excited about to talk about has been ephemeral environments. And when I got there, I wasn't familiar with developing with them, but I've learned so much, and I wanted to share just what I've learned today. And I hope this can be a great resource. All right, so my talk is called Ephemeral Environments, Redefining Pre-Production, because I feel like we've had so many advancements in production infrastructure, but pre-production is kind of stuck in the past. There's less attention put into it, and I think that a lot of that is probably because it doesn't get put on the roadmap because a lot of stakeholders aren't really accessing it anyway, so it's less of a priority. That's just one of my theories, but I want to talk about why pre-production deserves to catch up and how we can build out a system to do that. So let's get started. So I'd like to say that in 2024, this might be a little controversial, but I want to say that production's pretty good. It's solid, it's passable, it's come a long way. And I think that, that's going to be controversial, that's going to vary org to org, but I think we can't deny that there have been some really great advancements like microservices, load balancing, Kubernetes edge, lots and lots of cloud native technologies. So I think that that's all stuff that we cannot deny. I think that staging can still be a bottleneck. It's not necessarily a priority, and by staging, I'm using that synonymously with any testing or QA environments. I think for the most part, depending on where you are, it's a good production of your production, at least it's a good approximation of your production, at least like architecture-wise. Maybe it's a little bit different, but it can still be a bottleneck. And the reason that it is such a good approximation of production is because it often shares a lot of services and dependencies with production, which just kind of sounds like an anti-pattern, but that does give us the capability to test things pretty realistically in staging or test or QA and get kind of a similar idea of how they perform in production. And because of that, it means that they're also very expensive. And because your production isn't designed to be turned on and off, that means that these staging environments, if they are really such a good approximation, they are also kind of long-lived. They're on 24/7, meaning that you can only really afford a few of them because that is just a lot of cloud that you are not using. And not to continue being negative, but even though we have made so many great advancements, we're still behind on a few things. And one of those things is, again, I think that this one's a little controversial, but testing is still happening in production. And I know that there are many, many smart ways to do this. We have feature flagging, canary releases, but a lot of the time, people are testing in production not because they necessarily want to or because they're doing it smartly, but because they have to, because it's a last resort. And there are certain integrations and reasons that you can't exactly get your pre-production performance in production. So you might be forced to bring something in. So I'm just saying, it's inherently a bad thing if you're doing that because you have no other options. And you essentially, I thought that this was a good conversation I had with my colleague. Unless someone is signing up for your beta program as a user, they shouldn't have the chance to see or interact with a bug. And I can't help but agree with that. And then, of course, there are not enough staging and test environments to go around. This gets bottlenecked pretty quickly. And then your key stakeholders can't get access to features until they're deployed. And that's just because staging and pre-production, non-production environments aren't very user-friendly. So I just want you to think about this, and maybe this is a question that you think about a lot. Maybe this is something that you don't need to worry about, but what if you could have unlimited staging environments? How much faster could you go? How would that unblock people? And I just want to talk about what might be the dev workflow. And this is, of course, with staging environments, that rectangle that seems a little bit late in the pipeline. But basically how it would work is if you're developing, you open a pull request once you believe that your feature is ready to be tested, and then you loop in a peer for code review. And once they approve that, you get that merged to main, deployed to your staging. But as you can see in this graphic, this branch is getting deployed along with 2 other branches. But sometimes it's like, 5, 10, 15 other branches. And the great thing is you can test them all on staging at the same time. But that also isn't as great as we think, because when you look at it, you're testing all these things in tandem, and when you uncover bugs, you don't exactly know to which developer each bug belongs. So that's kind of the job of the QA engineer, to go through, pinpoint where exactly the bugs occurred, and loop you back in and say, hey, sorry, your branch broke things, can you go fix it? And of course that's a multi-day process, because you'll fix it, which happens pretty quickly. You'll loop in your friend again for code review, get that approved, merged to main, and wait maybe a few days for them to run the test against the staging environment again. And unfortunately, something that could have been done in 5 minutes is really being stretched to several days or several weeks. And I think in the end, it really shouldn't be your peer's job to be reviewing your code. They shouldn't be reviewing your code and checking for bugs that can be caught by your automated tests, because that kind of defeats the purpose of automated testing to begin with. So I want to talk about, of course, there are many ways to do this, but I want to talk about one of the easy solutions to shift a certain rectangle left a bit would be by implementing ephemeral environments. So ephemeral environments, so many definitions. These are also commonly known like review apps, preview environments, review environments, lots of names floating around. But ephemeral environments seems to be a good one that we can focus on today. Also, for the sake of today's talk, there are also ephemeral development environments, but I'm just primarily talking about the ephemeral environments that you would use to replace staging. And they're just short-lived, completely isolated, standalone deployments of your app. They tend to be identical to production, so you can have like all your integrations, your database, dependencies, etc., which means that they should perform like your production and any pre-production testing. They're on demand, so they're there when you need them, and they should spin down when you don't, because that's expensive. And they're entirely secure, and I mean that both in a vulnerability way, because they are completely isolated from other environments, but also just in a, trying to think of a word for this, but also, yeah, they're secure, and also just to attacks, because they're entirely isolated from anything else in your pipeline. So I wanted to show you what this looks like when we shift something a little bit left. And so you can see this is your exact same workflow, except we're using ephemeral environments at the pull request level. So you're working on a feature to the point where it's ready for you to open a pull request, at which point your CI/CD will spin up an ephemeral environment that will be identical to production. It will be entirely based on the branch you're working on in your pull request. It will run all your tests, and then instead of waiting several days for your branch to get deployed to staging, you can fix your bug right then and right there as soon as it gets uncovered. And then, only then, like once your test's passed, which, maybe every commit thereafter, it should rebuild and it should start, so you can keep iterating, and maybe your tests take 10, 15 minutes to run your full end-to-end tests, and you can just make sure that you're fixing things as they come up until all your tests pass, at which point it's kind of reasonable to then ask your peer for a code review, because then that way they're not really looking for any initial bugs, they're just seeing like you're following best practices, good organization, and then you can be pretty confident merging these branches to your main branch and deploying to staging, knowing that you don't have any bugs inherent to the branch. And then when your end-to-end tests will run again against the staging environment, they will only be looking for bugs that are caused by your features interacting, but not from each standalone feature. So I wanted to talk a little bit about a community project that I started 3 years ago when I joined Shipyard. And to backtrack a little bit, before I joined Shipyard, I'd only ever worked with a traditional static staging environment. And I was working on a feature that couldn't accurately be tested on my local machine, just because I didn't have the type of compute that it needed, and I didn't have some of the third-party dependencies, integrations. So I, of course, I thought, okay, I'm going to take a leap of faith. I have to put put this on the staging environment. And of course it broke staging. And that seemed really, really awful. That's a feeling I would not wish on anyone, although I'm sure that many of us have had the same experience. It's sort of like a rite of passage, unless you're one of those people who is immune to mistakes like that. But, you know, honestly, you really can't approximate how something's going to end up in staging, the way it would perform on your local machine. So that was something I didn't appreciate. But when I got to Shipyard, I started looking into ephemeral environments, and there wasn't a whole lot of non-internal information out there back then. It's been 3 years, so there's a lot more information now. Really, really glad to see it. I think, yeah, for the most part, I talked to a lot of people in cloud native in the industry and seeing like how they've done this, looking for best practices. And in the end, I compiled a guide with the help of some of this advice and some of my teammates, just sharing what they had learned. And right now it's, yeah, I just wanted to talk about a little bit about this. Also, it's a community project. It's open source. It's on GitHub. And I'm always looking for contributors. So if you have any content information you'd like to add, or if it's just there, of course, always maintenance to a static site. So if that's of interest to you, would love to get you on board with that. But yeah, here's a quick overview of the 6 pillars that we decided were most important to ephemeral environments. This was kind of the common ground that everyone shared who I talked to, and they should enable a certain amount of things. The first thing is cross-team collaboration. Should be pretty seamless working between devs and other devs, but also they should be good for a product to collaborate with you, QA, or any stakeholder inside your organization. They should be good for testing, which we talked about a little bit earlier. Basically, they should be able to be leveraged by your CI/CD, so you can catch bugs pretty early and also just test against them as often as you need. They should be secure, and that's in the vulnerability sense, but also being decoupled from any dependencies or shared services unless absolutely necessary. And they should fit kind of seamlessly into the dev workflow. They shouldn't really they shouldn't have any afterthought. They should be an afterthought. You should be developing using your traditional Git flow, and you shouldn't have to do anything different at all. They should just kind of be there, be completely automated, and kind of live with your GitOps flow. And then cost control, and that's such as they should use the cloud in a smart, elastic way and scale to 0 when not in use. And on demand, which is they should be there when you need them, and they should be gone when you don't. And that applies to anyone on your team should be able to access them at any point in time. And there shouldn't have to be any manual intervention. And which is, yeah, what I just wanted to talk about that a little bit more. So maybe you're a developer working on a feature in the morning, and you're talking to someone who's in a different time zone. You don't have to worry about leaving this on. Like one of my teammates says, it's like, why would you leave the grill running when you're not barbecuing? Like, what's the point? And it's kind of the same with cloud costs. Like, why would you leave your cluster on all day and all night when you don't need to? So they should be super, super fast to spin up, and they should scale to 0 when that's all done. And yeah, so then someone in the afternoon can just say, okay, I want to do a code review, and I want to see like what your environment looks like in this pre-production environment. I want to see, yeah, the changes you made and just interact with it. And they should be able to do that and spin that down, so you don't have to either screen share or call them over and say, hey, look, I have the staging environment. Why don't you help me out here? So that's absolutely a must. And then last but not least, I just wanted to talk about security pertaining to ephemeral environments. And there are a few points here. And I think one of the most crucial ones is just with any pre-production environments, just because these are entirely isolated doesn't mean that you can still take shortcuts when it comes to security. And one of those things is absolutely removing all PII from any data you use. And even if you redact someone's name and email address with the rest of your data points, it's super, super easy to trace that information back to a certain person, especially in the age of big data. Of course, this will vary depending on how many data points you're collecting, but yeah, maybe shuffle that around. Definitely think about that. Also, these should be you should be not handling any auth logic. There are so many great SSO providers right now. They're like Google SSO, GitHub, GitLab, and then that way you can just make sure that access is limited entirely to your own org, and that way you can like grant permissions based on environments, but also just based on all your environments. So you're only letting the people who need to see each one see them, and then also in case of a breach, that's Google's problem, that's GitHub's problem. That's not something you need to worry about inside your org. And then, of course, making sure that these environments are completely decoupled, because, you should be able to break them and not take down your entire environment pipeline. You should be able to take risks with these instead of really walking on eggshells and thinking, okay, well, I want to do this, but I think it's risky and I don't want to break my environment, so I'm going to spend like 5 times longer working on this. All right, I wanted to thank you very much. I want to try something a little bit unconventional here. Last time I did this, I got some really great technical questions, and a lot of them were a little bit outside my realm at this point, but I thought that what would be a great thing to try right now is maybe we crowdsource some answers. Maybe we, move into breakout groups, and I'm open to thinking about topics for this, but I'm thinking one of those could be talking about implementation, like certain cloud native technologies that you'd use, how you would build this from scratch. Another could be just problems and solutions, like use cases for these, and how you would make sure that they're up to speed. But yeah, I'm open to hearing your opinions. Yes?
Yeah, I have a question actually. Thank you. Yeah, I just want to go back to this particular project I worked on a few years ago.
Yeah.
It's actually hardly a year and a half ago. It's a defense client, same client I was talking about before. Anyway, they had a data migration that had to be done from some old legacy system into the new MES system, which is kind of like a ERP type of genre. But anyway, I think there's a huge problem with silos in big companies and lack of trust between different groups and IT in particular, as well as the stakeholders. So that causes huge problems. What they needed was something like this, where we could just do some sandbox, and they wouldn't even give me access to a sandbox, believe it or not. So it's just, I think this ephemeral environments makes a lot of sense. I also have a startup where I have to be constantly doing code reviews, testing, and stuff. So I don't know if it'll work in my case, but in the big company case, I think this would be very, very relevant. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it, and that's great for me to hear context on this. I'm always looking for context and hearing how people are working within their organizations and just what a typical environment workflow looks for. But that's absolutely very valuable. Thank you for driving home. Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. Yes.
I'm just curious, what kind of application are you working on?
So essentially, you can work on any application. Me? Yeah, so at Shipyard, we do a self-service ephemeral environment application, but I also think that it's something that you can build. There is the build versus buy argument, but we do one where you just take your repository and it spins up in an ephemeral environment. And yes.
How do you get involved and contribute to the Git?
You can go to github.com/ephemeral environments, or you can go to ephemeralenvironments.io, and there's a little star button at the top that will take you to the GitHub page.
How does this relate to the usual data environment? Is this like replacing?
Yes, that's a good question. So for the most part, there are ephemeral dev environments, but these ones, I think, at least for the sake of today's talk, these ones typically happen in lieu of a staging environment. It's just a way for you to have more environments in your workflow, but typically dev environments happen in the inner loop before the pull request, and traditional ephemeral environments would happen at the pull request level, but still update on every code change. Yeah, but I think for the most part, a lot of people who use ephemeral environments use local dev environments, but if you're using cloud dev environments, that might make sense to have an ephemeral cloud dev environment. Yes?
What if you use to solve problems where the staging is kind of stuck in place and can't just be lifted into a cloud,
That's
into a Docker?
Oh, that's a good question. So I guess in those cases, you would have your traditional staging environment just in place, and you would still be eventually pushing to it, but you would also use ephemeral environments earlier on in the pipeline. And you would hope, I guess, in a perfect world, it would be architecture identical to your static staging environment. But of course, that's really hard when you have two different types of environment frameworks to begin with. But I guess you would either, yeah, I guess if you really can't put it in a Docker container, there are ways to do it without containers. But I think that you would have your traditional staging environment and then your ephemeral environments earlier on. And hopefully that would reduce the need for so much testing and staging. Yeah, so we have about 5 minutes left. I just wanted to say, like, if you want to get into breakout groups and any more questions about, I think it would be great, yeah, doing a group on implementation. Does anyone have any other ideas for things you'd like to talk about with the rest of the room? Yeah. All right, well, I'll just be floating around and maybe we can have a type of roundtable discussion. But again, thank you so much for joining me today. If you have any more questions, you can email me, natalie@shipyard.build. And yeah, if you're interested in contributing to this project, I'd be very, very happy to get some contributions there. Thank you so much, and thank you for coming to Civo Navigate Local.